Every parent in the country faces this exact same problem. How has no one solved this problem? There were other things along the way that we have now built into our system. Like if you have a Wi-Fi camera, you can't use it when you travel because you can't tap into third-party Wi-Fi at places like a hotel and even some Airbnbs. They won't let you attach your own devices to their networks. Lots of other things like when your 2-year-old coughs in the middle of the night, you do not need to hear that cough, but you do, and then you're awake for either another, 10 minutes or potentially hour while you try to get yourself back to sleep. So I had all these things that I wanted to be built into the system that I would eventually build.
Welcome to the Founders Journey podcast. Inspiration, education for founders by founders. Welcome back, Founders Journey podcast. It's always fun when I do these and I have the founder of a company that I actually knew the company before I knew the founder, and was a big fan of the company. So really glad to have Kevin Lavelle here with us today. Kevin's co-founder and chairman at Mizzen and Main. If you're not familiar with Mizzen and Main, I'll let him tell the story, but I'll tell you why I'm a big fan, just because it's sort of like athletic wear. Kevin, I'm going to butcher this, but it's sort of like athletic wear combined with formal wear, formalish, more formal wear, right? So you can look decent while you're still wearing athletic wear, and you don't smell in it, and you don't have to, fold it and everything. Somebody like myself who spends way too much time on airplanes and traveling and stuff, it's a great tool, in the suitcase. So Kevin's chairman and founder there, and he's also co-founder and CEO at Harbor. So we'll hear about Harbor, his new deal, and hear all about his background. So Kevin, welcome to the Founders Journey podcast.
Thanks, Greg. And it's good to see you again.
So yeah, it's great to see you. Kevin and I were talking about this before. We had actually met, I think probably you said it was 2016, so 8 years ago.
Something
Both
like that,
Kevin
yeah.
and I were finalists for the and actually I think Kevin was aware. I was a finalist. Kevin was like the winner of the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year award down in the Southwest region down in Texas. So we had met a little bit about there. So, let's start out at the top here, Kevin. Tell us about your own journey. You've had a few startups. I know you sort of had an interesting start to those things coming out of college and started pretty young. Tell us about the journey and how you got started.
Yeah, thanks. And I always appreciate the opportunity. Building my second startup now, Harbor. We're looking to change sleep and sanity for parents, anyone with an infant, young children, with a better baby monitor and a remote night nanny service that we'll get to. But it's been really cool to do this again and take the lessons from my first time and get to build another great consumer brand. But the initial foray into entrepreneurship was a little bit unexpected. Some people, they knew they were going to be an entrepreneur from a very young age, and that was not me. I was a management consultant for a few years and then an investment analyst, and ultimately got to this point where in my mid-20s, this was 2011, 12, it was kind of Facebook was really starting to take off, and there's so many cool entrepreneurial things happening. I just thought, I really want to go build my own thing. And this idea for Mizzen and Main had been with me for many years, and ultimately decided to pursue that dream. But the idea for it came, I was an intern in DC in college, which taught me I never wanted to work in politics, but I did get to watch a congressional staffer run into a building soaked in sweat. And when he dried off an hour later, he looked even worse. And I'm for people who are viewing this, I'm wearing one of Mizzen and Main's golf polos. I grew up playing golf, and I watched performance polos take over on the golf course. And I wondered why no one had ever made a dress shirt out of performance fabric. So that seemed like, I don't know, that would be a pretty good idea. But I was, 19 or so at the time. And, the innovator's dilemma is a very real thing. If it was such a good idea, someone would have done it already. That's definitely not true. And it stops a lot of innovations from happening. But I thought about this idea for many years. And ultimately in 2011, started tinkering, just kind of like figuring out what to do. And in 2012, we launched to the world. MizzenandMain.com went live on July 19th, 2012. I expected, great fanfare and everyone rushing to buy these, revolutionary dress shirts. And if you build it, they will come is just really not true in basically anything. You actually have to go bring people, in many cases, kicking and screaming to your product. to get the flywheel in the early days starting to roll. We did about $50,000 in 2012, and that was both exciting and nothing. And then about $250,000, and then $1 million in 2014, and that's when things really started to take off. Like we hit an absolute inflection point, and up and to the right was a very big thing. But through that journey, got to do some really incredible things. I mean, standing up a brand, production line, multiple product categories. We started selling in wholesale, built a DTC brand, did some pop-ups, got to work with incredible ambassadors like JJ Watt and eventually Phil Mickelson. We sponsored Tim Ferriss's podcast, which changed the trajectory of our business forever as well. And then eventually brought in private equity in 2017, had a really incredible run with some great angel investors, and ultimately brought in a great private equity firm. L Catterton is the world's leading consumer retail private equity firm, and they are great partners with a great track record. And then the very short kind of founder's journey and how I got here in 2018, I was working with an executive coach, and I was ready to bring in someone who actually knew anything about apparel, because I was figuring it out every day, trying to find a president to come in and run the business. And at the same time, I was asked by a philanthropy to go build sort of a tech accelerator for nonprofits. How do we help nonprofits achieve greater scale, use technology? And I thought, well, maybe I'll just bring in a new CEO and I'll go build something from the ground up, do another 0 to 1 kind of thing. And so we brought in another CEO from the outside. I stayed on as chairman. I worked for the philanthropy for 3 years, incredible experience and great run. But then in 2022, I said, I got one more consumer startup in me, which is now Harbor. I spent a long time trying to figure out if what I wanted to do was even possible. Found a great co-founder. We spent the last 18 months laying the groundwork. And here in May of 2024, we have a wait list launched. We've got a great wait list so far. And then we launch our pre-sales shortly and begin shipping our first products to customers this spring. So a really exciting time. And obviously a lot to unpack in each of those, but that's the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just get into, Mizzen and Main, I think, has become a great DTC brand. I actually found out about you. I remember, I'm still a big fan. I've been a big fan of the Tim Ferriss podcast for years. And that's actually how I found out about you. So, about Mizzen and Main. What was the passion that kind of led you now into Harbor, right? Which is totally different from, now you're into baby monitors and night nannies. Like, what was that kind of, that passion that sort of said, was it more around building the brand, or was it really something about that market?
Yeah, I'll tackle that question in just a second, but a fun kind of full circle moment. Tim Ferriss recently invested in Harbor. We sort of loosely stayed in touch from the time that we sponsored his podcast with Mizzen and Main, and in reaching out to everyone I knew about actually publicly launching Harbor, I shot him a short note and said, I don't even know if this is still your phone number. It's been a little while since we chatted, but I'm launching Harbor. We went back and forth, and he was really actually very inquisitive and very interested in what we were doing. And he joined our cap table as a very significant angel investor. So that was an amazing full circle moment when it comes to building startup number 2. But so ultimately what led me to say, I'm going to do this crazy founder journey one more time, was another very deeply personal experience, similar to Mizzen and Main, seeing something that was profoundly broken and saying there's a better way, and ultimately pursuing it. My son was born in 2016, and I actually signed the term sheet for the L Catterton investment in the labor and delivery room for my son, Jack. And a couple months later, at home in his own room, I had done some research, and the most innovative, and I'm going to use air quotes for anyone watching this, baby monitor on the market is a company called Nanit. It is a Wi-Fi camera that has an app on your phone. It's basically like a Ring camera with some things that they say are like for babies. I woke up one morning and the app had crashed on my phone. And I learned the hard way that all of these companies who say we're a baby monitor, they're not a baby monitor. It is a Wi-Fi camera with an app on your phone. And very, very, very important that every parent knows, because I learned this the hard way, and now I've heard from hundreds of other parents, it's not a baby monitor, it's an app on your phone. And when an app crashes, there's no way that an app that's crashed can tell your iPhone to alert you that it has crashed, because it crashed, it's not working. And also just the very basic reality of, I got my phone here. If you forget to plug your phone in at night, your phone can't tell you that it's dying. If it's on silent and it's, on the other side of the room and you forget to plug it in, there's no way to alert you. If you plug your phone in and the outlet is dead or the cord is bad, you may not know. So upon that discovery, and of course they don't tell you that on their website. There's nothing in the FAQs about what happens if my app crashes.
Right.
But I went out and bought an old school Motorola camera and an old school Motorola monitor. Now it's a direct local connection between the camera and the monitor, but importantly, if the monitor's battery is dying, it will alert you. And if the monitor loses connection with the camera, it blares an awful sound, which is to tell you, I'm no longer monitoring your kid. That's a really important feature to have that none of these Wi-Fi app-based camera systems can do. So we use that, but we decided to keep the Wi-Fi camera and we switched over to Nest because I didn't like the Nanit product. But we decided to keep the Wi-Fi feature because what we wanted to do was we had a nanny. My wife actually was our CMO at Mizzen and Main at the time when she went back to work and, having a babysitter. You want to check in that they're, taking care of your kid the way that they should. And so we had to run two systems in parallel, which is just absolutely silly because every parent in the country faces this exact same problem. How has no one solved this problem? There were other things along the way that we have now built into our system. Like if you have a Wi-Fi camera, you can't use it when you travel because you can't tap into third-party Wi-Fi at places like a hotel and even some Airbnbs. They won't let you attach your own devices to their networks. Lots of other things, like when your 2-year-old coughs in the middle of the night, you do not need to hear that cough, but you do, and then you're awake for either another 10 minutes or potentially hour while you try to get yourself back to sleep. So I had all these things that I wanted to be built into the system that I would eventually build. And so for those in the video I'll show, we have built a camera and a 10-inch tablet, very beautiful piece of hardware that the camera and the tablet connect directly to each other without the internet. They also both can use the internet if that is an option. So you get the best of both worlds. You get both modalities, and importantly, you have a dedicated fail-safe device that will alert you if it is dying or loses connection to the camera. And also, you get all the benefits of record and rewind and remote access. So you have an app on your phone, so you can check in while you're out to dinner if you are unsure of the new babysitter. You can also record and rewind. I mean, baby monitors, I love to share the joke that my parents' baby monitor for me was a box fan outside my door. Baby monitors are a somewhat new thing, but everyone uses them at this point in time. Why do you need a baby monitor? Some people might say that. I will say one of the most important things is to be able to look into your child's room without opening the door. Because once you open the door, the game's over. You're going to be in there for a while, especially as your kid gets a little bit older. Now you're negotiating with your child about leaving again, because every parent I know loves to joke that, bedtime should take about 4.5 minutes. It takes about an hour. And so if you don't want to go back into the room, but know that your kid is safe, we've all had that moment where you hear this loud bang and you're like, oh God, what happened? Just real quickly look and then rewind, which you can't do on these old school devices. Just rewind real quick. Oh, he just slammed his foot into the side of the crib. He's fine, not making any sounds anymore. Like, it's all good. I don't need to go in there. That is a real benefit of a baby monitor. And you don't get that with the old school devices, despite some of their benefits. And then with the newfangled Wi-Fi systems, you don't have the dedicated fail-safe monitor, which I experienced, and now I've heard from so many other parents they've experienced as well. That is the foundation for our very revolutionary product, which is a remote night nanny. And the idea is to democratize access to sleep expertise. And instead of $400 to $700 a night for weeks or months on end for someone to come into your house and help you overnight, for $20 a night, that's where we'll get to, where that's our true north and how we think we can change the face of sleep for parents everywhere. You can hire us to remotely control the volume on your monitor with a professionally trained night nurse on the other side of that monitor. So if your child fusses or cries for 1 or 2 minutes and stops, you won't hear anything at all. Now they'll look in, they'll make sure that nothing's wrong. If something is wrong, they turned over, their leg is stuck, their arm is stuck, they got out of their swaddle, we'll alert you. But if nothing is wrong, you get to keep sleeping. Now, if they cry for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever the threshold is, and they're not settling down, it's time to go in. We'll turn that volume back on, and then you get to be the one that goes in and cares for your child at night rather than outsourcing that to someone else. And frankly, also having to deal with someone else in your house. There are some amazing night nannies who make all the difference in the world for the families they work with. There's also some horror stories of people who have fallen asleep with children in a compromising position, fallen asleep on the job. Night shift work is really hard and really
Yep.
expensive.
What I love about, I think, both what you're talking about now with Harbor, but also, with Mizzen and Main is kind of the elegance of the products that you've been, you've been putting out. And I think that was the kind of the hallmark of the Mizzen and Main line. It sounds like that's exactly kind of the way that you're looking at Harbor. You've had I mean, you're a young guy. You've had a fairly remarkable career as a founder. One of the things we'd love to talk about here, because we've all got them, is kind of those mistakes that we've made along the way as a founder. And even somebody with the success you've seen, undoubtedly they're there. Like, what are those biggest mistakes you think, along the way that you've kind of stumbled into?
Yeah, I'm smiling because it's like, which one of the biggest mistakes should we focus on at this
We've
moment?
all got a laundry list. Yeah, absolutely. We could. That's why we don't do this as like a Tim Ferriss podcast where it's like a
Yeah,
4 hour long thing, because we've all got 4 hours of mistakes that we've made.
yeah, at least I could probably talk for 4 hours about one or two of the mistakes. So one of the biggest things that's different between Mizzen and Main and Harbor is,
Mhm.
and this was a mistake I made with Mizzen and Main, but also it would have been impossible to not address this issue in building
Mhm.
Harbor, was bringing on industry expertise early enough. Now,
Mhm.
in Mizzen and Main, I just found a way to make the first 1,000 shirts and then kind of scratched and clawed my way forward. And then I was selling the product. I was out there. I was getting feedback, making it better. I was doing everything I could. Now,
Yep.
I didn't need to hire an industry expert to get started, but year 2 or 3, I really should have brought more expertise in just to help make improvements, identify gaps, identify things that I wasn't aware of in some of the conversations I was having with vendors, all of those things. I didn't, because for years before I started Mizzen and Main, and then years after I started Mizzen and Main, almost everyone I spoke to in the industry told me why it was a bad idea and no one would ever buy the product, and why I was dumb for doing what
Right.
I was doing. So I'm like, well, I don't really need to pay any of you to help me, because your advice to me is that I shouldn't exist. That
Right.
was naive and short-sighted, because just because everyone that I talked to was against what I was doing doesn't mean there weren't people that could have been very productive and helpful. There's also the reality of, I mean, we had just no money and we're like scratching and clawing our way forward. So paying up for expertise was both a little out of question and also not something I really wanted to spend the money on. Because
Right.
after the first 2 years, when we were just kind of like trying to do anything to get going, by 2014, we started to get to a point, for better or for worse, where we couldn't miss. We were selling out of everything we were making. Things were going really well. I look back at the product in 2014 and cringe at how bad it was, but it was pioneering and people loved it.
Sure.
I fast forward to, because I could talk about that for a long time, but I fast forward to with Harbor, we have my co-founder is a brilliant engineer and head of product. We have 4 full stack developers. We have a head of hardware. We have now I have a head of nursing. Oh, we just brought on our chief marketing officer recently, who worked with me at Mizzen and Main. And then we've got probably 15 contractors who are 1 or 2 hours a month up through 40 hours a week. And we have not put one product out into market yet, because we're
Right.
building a camera, a tablet, a robust set of firmware, software, backend. Like, there's so much that goes into what we're building that there is no way to hack this thing together and just like, well, just whip up two or three of them and see how it works. No, like, we did that with a lot of incredibly brilliant engineers, because it takes so much specialty and experience and expertise to get something like this made. So I couldn't have like just tried to do this without the expertise, but I think about that lesson a lot, which is, even if everyone tells you what you're doing isn't working, find somebody who can just help you make it slightly better, or see around the
Yeah.
corner in another way. I think the other big thing that I would say is, from the first time to the second time, when I started Mizzen and Main, I'd never run a P&L or hired anybody, let alone interviewed someone. And so I made every mistake in the HR book that is not, there are a lot of bad things that people do in HR. I made every mistake that you could make. And once I got a lot of reps, and now I don't know, I mean, I've had hundreds of people that I have reported up to me and hired and gone through that whole process. You just learn so much more about the process of um, how do you hire, how do you attract talent, how do you retain
Yeah.
talent, all of those things where you can't just fake that. Like you have to get the reps in order to be able to do that well.
Yep. Yeah. And that's such a common theme, right? I think those two pieces of advice, or those two, challenges that you ran into, right? Get the experts in there early, and then, really focus on hiring and recruiting early on. I think, I mean, especially the latter, it's something that we have, founders talk about all the time, right? And it's because it's such a common area of challenge that I think founders stumble into. But look, I mean, even I've done this a number of times, right? And still making the same mistakes when it comes to hiring, and it's a hard one to break.
Yeah. The way that I look at it is you're never going to get it right. But when you first go down this road, you are really far from good. And then you
Yep.
try and narrow that down over time to where you just you see around the corner with some of the mistakes that you made the first however many hundreds of times.
Yep.
But then, I think the other piece that you don't appreciate until you're really far in it is you can become an exceptional manager and be great at recruiting and hiring and retaining and all of that. But it's not too long before you're not actually interacting with most people most of the time.
That's right.
And there was a really great one of the directors, MDs at Ketterton, who became a mentor and a friend, really helped me understand that my job was effectively to become a head coach. And the success of a head coach is how good is that head coach's on football, for example, their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams, and then they've got someone who manages all the logistics. Like if the head coach is figuring out when the charter flight is taking the team across the country, that team is going to lose, right? Like
Correct.
they're just absolutely going
Yep.
to lose. And so it's all about how do you set the people up that you're working with to run the best organization that they're working with and cascade the values and decision making. And that just, I mean, no one even sort of told me that until, I was so far in it that I hadn't even comprehended that reality.
So how did you do it? I mean, you're like, was there a particular process that you went through, or when you sort of got to the end of that time at Mizzen and Main, how had you built that process, right? Or built that model that was working for you?
Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, stumbling through and doing it pretty poorly for a long time. And we had, I mean, when I left, I think we had 50 or so headquarter FTEs, something like that. When you're at 20 to 30, things change pretty dramatically. When you're at 10 people, you can all sit around the table. 20 to 30, things change a lot because then you realize most conversations not even don't involve you. You don't even know that they're happening. And
Right.
that is a dynamic where things change pretty dramatically. But for a long time, we were all around each other. We spent a lot of time together. And as a founder, started and led brand I was out there all the time. And I was like lead salesperson. I was bringing in all the athletes and ambassadors that we were working with. I was very front and center, and the way that I made decisions cascaded, I think, pretty well, especially given the
Yep.
nature of the people that we had. And I say that with like, I wasn't very good about being intentional about how that structure worked.
Mhm.
And then as we got bigger, I did have to change. One of the biggest changes that I made was implementing OKRs and
Yep.
just aligning the team. As a early stage startup right now, we have OKRs, but like there are only a couple things that really matter in terms of like we are getting ready to launch. Once you get bigger and you've got multi-channel, strategies and all these different moving pieces, it becomes all the more critical that you have very clear OKRs so that everyone knows what we're marching to. And then the kind of layered on piece that I think gets lost in some OKRs is that's fine, but then people have to know what are the values of the organization and how do we make trade-off decisions. So, okay, great. OKR is super clear. But then you're going to run into a point where you're like, which one is more important? If I could only put my time towards one of them, how do I know what matters more? And so that then led to just a much more intentional focus on how we did daily stand-ups for a while, and then all hands meetings so that we could communicate what was working, what wasn't working, and how we were shifting the prioritization of which ones were more important. For a while, and I think this is the best example I can give, um, in the 20 teens, profit was totally irrelevant to almost every company. And we were unprofitable, but we were growing at multi-100% year on year. There are
Mhm.
some businesses that were like, I won't name the company, but they were doing 40 million in revenue, but losing $20 million a year. That is,
Make it up
that's,
in volume. That's right.
yeah, sure.
Yep.
Um, and they had no intellectual property. There was no, there was no hidden value here. Um, but so we were always really close to profitable. And so the question, one of the best questions I got was like, if we could gain X number of dollars of revenue, what are we okay losing from a profit perspective? Because everybody was aligned around this top line growth, and let's stay as close to break even as possible, like single
Yep.
digit EBITDA loss percentage, which is sustainable, and you can tweak things very quickly if you have to.
Mhm.
And that was a really great way for us to talk through how we, if we had to literally say, do this at the expense of that, we could frame up how we were making those decisions. And then the last piece, we started using, the name has changed recently, but Charles Koch wrote a book called Good Profit, and he outlines his approach to running organizations called market-based management. It's now called principle-based management. But they have some really incredible toolkits on managing personnel and thinking through how you interview people, how you hire people, how you incentivize people, how you give feedback, and tools to align an organization on how we make these types of decisions.
Mhm.
And utilizing those tools was really helpful. I'll give one very concrete example. One of the tools that they use is called Role Responsibilities and Expectations, RR&E.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
everyone's used to a job spec where you write up what the job description is and you put it up on the website. There is never going to be a moment where you hire somebody who is a 100% ace on every single one of the responsibilities. Some people are a little better at this, a little better at that, and also based on the organization, you may have hired this job spec, but you got somebody who's not as good at this and really excellent at that, and so you need to shift the responsibilities that people have based on the talent that you have. That's really obvious on something like a football team where you've got, an incredible running back that changes the dynamic of every single play. Yet people forget that when it comes to an organization where you might have somebody who's really, really great at something, but in a role that isn't the perfect fit. And
Yep.
so the way that they frame it up is every person in the organization should write their own RR&E, and it should be 1 or 2 pages. And it's here's everything I'm responsible for, and here's what excellent looks like in each of those areas of responsibility. And it's a very simple exercise, but so eye-opening when you're like, this is what this person's job is. And you say, tell me what you think your job is and what excellent looks like. There's always a little bit of space as to what that actually looks like. And though we often want things to be so black and white, I'll give you one great example. We had a showroom at the front of our headquarters, and we also had our own stores. We had someone who ran our retail stores, and we had someone that was responsible for the office. So office supplies, managing
Mhm.
maintenance, managing, whatever the office logistics were. And they each wrote their RR&E out. And we discovered part of the reason we had such a gap in experience when people showed up at our office was because no one was responsible for the showroom at the front of the office. Because the office manager said, I don't manage retail and customers. And the
Mhm.
retail person said, I manage retail stores. So that surfaced this gap that was very significant and like not catastrophic because we could always sort of plug the gap, but it wasn't seamless because no one was responsible. And prior to utilizing this very simple tool, we had never had an opportunity to highlight that difference.
I love that example. So, I mean, just to be clear, individuals are writing this for themselves, right? So individual contributors are actually doing this. This is a top-down thing. This is like pure definition of bottoms up kind of
It's
approach.
exactly the opposite of top down. Now,
Yeah.
there is a structure in place where you say everyone, everyone should write their own RR&E. You should do it within 90 days of starting your job. You
Yep.
should do it you should do it in partnership with your manager. And also everyone's RR&E is public. These are not secret documents.
Yep.
Everyone should know what they are. And Also, you don't want to let the form get in the way of the function. And so
Yeah.
it's you just write it. And if you want to have longer form sentences because it allows you to properly articulate it, great. If you want to have shorter form bullets, that's fine too.
Yep.
That's hard because some often people from larger organizations are like, give me the exact template and the box that this is supposed to fit in.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and so it does take a little while to unlearn some of those behaviors that are so ingrained in massive corporations where it's just easier to put people in a box. You give them a form, you fill this out every 90 days. And that way I'm not going to get in trouble because everyone did exactly what they're supposed to do.
So there's another thing you said in there that I think really resonates with me. I had a very similar experience, right? And I say this because I think it's rare. This was when you talked about kind of what I would sort of deem sustainable growth, right? And this, because I think there's two ways that organizations tend to look at profitability. You either optimize to be as profitable as you possibly can be, or you optimize to just lose a pile of money and you're purely focused on growth, right? At my last company, we sort of took a very different approach that it sounds like you were taking as well, right? Which was it was creating kind of these boundaries of, you called it, as long as it's single digit kind of up or down, you're okay. So you're sort of sustaining your level of revenue based on how much you're willing to lose. I think that's especially in the startup world. And I come out of this, the startup world on the venture side and stuff. You tend to get that kind of thinking around it's okay to just lose, and you're seeing 50% growth on the top, but you're losing 50% on the bottom. Who the hell cares, right? Talk about that a little bit more because I think it's an important concept for founders who really do want to grow, but they don't want to be in that position of constantly fundraising.
Yeah, look, I think like everything, the truth is not black or white, and there's something in the middle that you need to
Right.
find. For us at the time, building a consumer brand that was apparel, um, and to be clear, I want to say abundantly, like we're still growing double digit growth and we're profitable now, and that was a change that we very uh, decidedly made where it's time to be a profitable business now, and we're going to navigate some of the trade-offs differently, but we still need to have meaningful double-digit growth. But in those early days when we were still growing at three 300% a year, the necessity to get to scale then affords you the ability to make those decisions later. If you have a really highly profitable business, consumer brand, and you're making, $5 million top line and $500,000, EBITDA every single year, that's great. No one is ever going to buy that business. And we had investors behind us, which means at a certain point in time, you either want to go public or you want to have somebody acquire you. And I sometimes people lose sight of what I'm saying there. You don't want to build a business just so you can sell it, but it's
Right.
all a question in like, what are you trying to do here? Now, if you want to build a cash flowing business that's going to sustain a lifestyle, or you're going to, buy one or two businesses a year that are of a similar profile over the next 15 years, I know plenty of people who do that. That is a very different path. There are pros, there are cons. One of my good friends, Brent Beshore, is prolific in buying businesses, and he's got a very specific profile that he goes after. He also dissuades any myth that there is some sort of like glory or glamour in some of the very blue collar businesses that he has been able to buy. And he dispels a lot of those myths because people are like, oh, it'll be so great. We'll just go buy this cash flowing business. And, he'll give the example where it's like, yeah, guess what? All of your employees were just arrested because they're in a drug ring. And you find
Right.
out that like your top three clients were all on the take, and your top salesperson was bribing them. Now you get to own this business. Good luck. And so
Right.
there's no right or perfect approach to which business you're doing. It's what game are you in? What game are you playing?
Yeah.
What's his name? He wrote Psychology Monday. Morgan Housel. Sorry,
Mhm.
Morgan. He's a friend and a great author. Um, he loves to point out like the problem with stock markets and Jim Cramer and CNBC and all this stuff is like there is advice that's given for people playing profoundly different games. And what's the right price for a stock? Well, you're going to hold it for a microsecond, a millisecond, half a day, a lifetime. If you don't know what game you're playing, you're always going to make the wrong decisions. And so, coming full circle back to your question, for us, still growing at over 100% a year, we had a risk and a loss tolerance that we were okay with based on our runway. And we sort of said, once we crest to this point, that's when we're going to start to tweak. We'll pull back a little bit on growth, we'll add to profitability, and then we're at a size and a scale where this is the game that we're playing, and we're very happy with that.
Yep.
I think the last thing, building now a new consumer business, from the ground up with consumer electronics, very complex builds, software, firmware, services, products, all of the above. We are making a enormous upfront investment for the ability to own the baby monitor and sleep market for the next decade. Now that requires, you're going to dip way down, and then we will be able to grow where our product will redefine what it means to be a parent and what it means to get sleep. And that's the investment required to do that, because we are taking care of people's children remotely, is enormous. And so there are very different ways to approach building a business. And that's why when most people talk to me about a startup, like, venture capital is not right for most businesses, because the nature of what you're trying to build and the dip before you get to the swing will take out most businesses. And that's the nature of the risk and the reward of being in venture and a venture-backed business.
Absolutely. So, completely pivoting for a second, this is just going to sound like kind of an odd question. What's the scariest day you've had as a founder? Like, what's a day where you're like, oh, crap, it may be over?
Yeah. Without giving any specifics away, I'll speak in generalities. There are moments in the fundraising journey where a deal that you're certain is going through falls through, or someone that said that they were going to execute X, Y, and Z backs out, changes the terms, whatever that might be. Earliest of days of building Mizzen and Main, I made so many mistakes, and I was able to just survive because the mistakes were $5,000 mistakes or even $50,000 mistakes. When you get to the point where that flywheel is spinning so fast and so much cash is coming in and so much cash is going out and it's going so fast, and you're fundraising, you are walking a tightrope where if you're wrong by, in some cases, a couple days, you may be insolvent, you may have some ability to be flexible, but when you can just recover from the mistakes, you're like, we'll figure it out, right? You might need to do an emergency gap, an emergency plug. You call your investors and they're willing to give you just a little bit more breathing room. I will just, again, in generalities, the precipitous nature of, I don't think that the funding is coming through. And that means at a point in time, not too distant from today, not only will we not be able to make payroll, I don't know that we will continue. That has happened to me more than once. That existential nature of existence in these types of journeys is very hard to it's very hard to sleep at night at times. It's also, I like taking really big swings and creating something that can redefine an industry and that millions of people will interact with. I like playing for big stakes. And so that means you also are taking big swings with big risks and very big consequences. It has been a very bumpy road in building Harbor. It's been the worst time to raise venture capital basically since 2009, unless you are AI something. Venture is pretty tight right now. And so it's been a long slog getting to this point where we're at a really exciting juncture. We're about to start shipping product to customers. But overall, the fundraising, and then I would say, not scary, but very, very consequential is, and it's taken a long time to work through, is when people that you trust deeply, you work together with for a long period of time, all of a sudden, like a switch flips in the head and the internal sociopath comes out, where now all of a sudden they're like, I kind of want to take you to the cleaners and just absolutely hose you. That's really tough because it's like, you know me so well, you know my vulnerabilities, we had trust together, and you are going to manipulate them for a couple extra months of severance, a couple extra months of whatever, and it makes it a little bit shakier to trust people the next time around. It's
Yeah.
just never, it never stops being surprising, although it still is, that people can go from trusted confidant and ally to, like, they're just okay torching their reputation and burning
Yeah.
everything to the ground with them on the way out.
I'll tell you, you only have to go through that experience once to never, ever forget.
Mm-hmm.
I've had, again, just like you, I've had experiences where I don't want to get too into the specifics right now because it'll kind of give it away.
Yeah.
But man, when you are on the receiving end of that from people that you have trusted that have been on your team, and all of a sudden the pace that it goes, right, from trusted confidant to you're now completely under attack is shocking. And I think as a founder, we all have those moments, right? And they're terrifying and they're heart wrenching. And unfortunately, it is a part of the journey, right? It is a part of what you go through as a founder, because not everybody understands this, and that's, I think, the thing that is hard for founders to come to grips with. That's, why having community and having other founders to talk to and learn from is so important.
When I spend time thinking about it, it's always surprising, but never surprising how quickly people are willing to wipe a 20-year professional reputation, just throw it away for a very inconsequential difference to the process. And obviously they're not making rational decisions, and all sorts of other things have come into play. That is sort of human nature. But what has been more surprising for me is seeing where those people end up and going do they not do background checks or reference checks or I mean, to be clear, you get to a point where you sign
nobody called me, right?
You sign documents and you go, I will say nothing. But when someone calls and says, hey, I'm calling about so and so, and you go, I have nothing to say. I have nothing to say, right? That tells you everything that you need to know about somebody when someone goes, I have nothing to say. And so many people, just companies, don't even bother picking up the phone. And that is why some of these people continue to end up in additional positions after some pretty self-destructive behavior. But we could have a whole podcast about people's self-destructive behavior as founders.
It would be a private one. We'll only let certain people into it, but yeah, it'll be a great one. So what do you think, Kevin, if you kind of think about your career, what's been your superpower as a founder? Because you've done some pretty remarkable things.
In a very negative way, but still complimentary. People talked about Steve Jobs with his reality distortion field, where he just made the impossible happen, and he burned people out and he screwed people over and all of that stuff. And so there are very few people in the world who ever operate at that level. But I would say for me, the superpower has been helping people see, whether it's investors, customers, celebrity endorsements, no one's doing this and we're going to go do that. Or, hey, we're only here on the journey and we're going to get there. And I know that I don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we will. And, suspending the disbelief and all the reasons that it's going to fail and just going, I don't know, we'll figure out a way to get there. That is a very rare skill set. And I don't say superior, it's rare. There are all sorts of reasons why it's bad and it has its limitations, and I need people around me that operate differently so that we can solve the problems that need to be solved. I will never forget Kristen Smith, who's one of my, I think she was our first hire at Mizzen and Main. She came to me at a certain point in time and said, hey, Kevin, I did the math, and based on how many units we have and you're our next orders, it is literally impossible for us to do the revenue that we say we're going to do in the second half of the year. And it was oh, we should probably order some more shirts. And so when you just know you're going to find a way to get that done and get there and you'll figure it out, you can leave a lot of details, in off to the wayside. And so you need people around you. There's no founders are not better. Just have our own skill set, and we do some things that other people won't. But we have to be surrounded by people who are able to do all the rest of the things that it takes to make an organization successful. And so the kind of subtext of that, or the secondary piece, is I've built a really incredible network over the last decade plus. Most of the early investors for Mizzen and Main were people that I'd met while I was a student at SMU or in my first job or two, and maintaining those relationships and putting myself in a position where some of those people would say, I believe in you, despite zero track record and a very silly business plan that seems impossible to, achieve. And that has led to so many amazing doors being opened that you just never know where it's going to come next. And I find that to be one of the hardest balancing acts now at this phase of my career, because so many doors that were totally unexpected that I took have led to a lot of incredible things. But I have two young kids. I am chairman of one business, building another. I have a wife I love. I try to have some hobbies. And so now I'm just having to say no to so many things. And I always wonder, what doors am I actually not opening that could lead to some really incredible things?
It haunts you when you hit that point. I'm in the same world, although I bet one of my kryptonites, I guess, if I asked you what your superpower was, one of my kryptonites is definitely my inability to say no very often. So fortunately, I have other people who are better at it than me, who can help me with that, because it's a huge struggle, right? I mean, you're a founder, you're an optimist, you do things, right? You do larger than life things, and you always have room on your plate, right?
Yeah.
Your plate's never full.
And that optimism leads to, as we discussed, taking on too many things and believing that I can just find a way to get everything done that needs to get done. The realist and the experience of building Mizzen and Main have helped me modulate some of those trade-offs in a better way. You get invited to an event, and like I don't go to most events. I try to be very selective in which ones I go to. But you go to one event and you meet one person at that event randomly, totally random. You didn't know they were going to be there. You weren't trying to meet them, and they introduce you to, and like all of a sudden, all these things start coming together. It's hard to. Some things are easy to say no to, but it's hard to figure out on the things that really are quite tempting. Like, it's easy to say no to just random stuff, but it's the really good stuff with a lot of hidden potential that it becomes all the more difficult to figure out what to say no to. I would say it is somewhat easier right now, because with a 5 and a 7-year-old, we got soccer practice, and we've got, track meets and ballet recitals, and I'm just not going to miss most of that. I have to make some sacrifices and trade-offs, but a mentor of mine, Bobby Lyle, incredible entrepreneur and philanthropist and community leader, he said, the best part when I was starting Mizzen and Main as a first-time founder, he said, the best part of being an entrepreneur will be you can go to basically every one of your kids' games, recitals, practices, or whatever. Now, you won't be able to, because you have to run a business, but so many other people, lawyers, accountants, all these other folks, they've got a steadier life, but also they bill by the hour, and they get to work whatever 80 hours a week they want. And that ultimately is a trade-off that, despite the lack of security and the chaos of the existential crises, I relish the fact that I got to coach my kids' soccer for the last 3 years. And he's not going to be a professional soccer player, but I'm always going to remember, and he's always going to remember, that I was there.
Yep. Well, it's certainly a powerful motivator, right? And I think that is, at the core of it, you look at so many founders, and we talk about this as being this, professional journey, but in so many ways when we started this podcast, we called it the founder's journey because it's anything but a professional journey. It very much is a very personal, inward kind of journey that people go through. When we launched our venture fund, Evergreen Mountain Equity Partners, a couple of years ago, my business partner, Ira, and I got together, and we said, the kind of the core that we want to focus on is we want to go out and we want to fund. And there's, a thesis for the fund and things like that. But ultimately, at its core, we wanted to back what we call find a way founders. And you've mentioned, it's just funny, you've mentioned that exact term multiple times as you've, during this interview, and that find a way founder that just figures out how to persevere, right? That they're having those moments that we talked about in the scariest days, and they're having those existential crises, right, on a fairly regular basis. But somehow, some way, they're just kind of navigating through that tunnel. And it's and you are a perfect example of that, Kevin. Just last question here to wrap it up, just real quick, because I love sort of ending this with a call out from you to somebody else. Who's had the biggest influence on your entrepreneurial career?
Ooh, that is a tough question. So, as a founder, I get to bend the rules. So I'll go with I'll cheat and I'll say two. Um, Very different though. My my parents and my wife. That would be like in terms of influence on my career. My parents, I won the parent lottery. They set me up to be able to think differently, and I had a wonderful upbringing. Very very fortunate. Could go on and on. My wife and I met very quickly, got engaged and married. And right after we got married, I quit my job to start Mizzen and Main. And her support of this journey is, I've seen so many people talk about the greatest life hack in the world is finding the best partner, right?
Mhm.
And I know a lot of people who really struggle in most aspects of their lives because their partnership with their spouse is out of whack. And so feel very fortunate on both of those. For the real answer to the question that you're asking in terms of like who could someone maybe go find or follow, I think I have to point out in terms of like real point of leverage change in my trajectory would be Damon John. Um, I was so fortunate that just before I started Mizzen and Main, I got to ask him a couple questions. And he gave me some advice in starting Mizzen and Main that changed a lot of early decisions around pursuing wholesale and thinking about customers and thinking about aspects of the product. That it was a one-time meeting. We got to have dinner back in early 2012 before Mizzen and Main had even started. And it really shaped a lot of very early aspects of decision making. And then because I recommend this book more than anything else, I'll point any entrepreneur, any founder, any employee to Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About the Hard Things. I don't know
Yep,
Ben.
it's one of my favorites as well. Yep.
I've chatted with him a little bit. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, Ben and I are friends. I've chatted with him a little bit, but his book was so instrumental in so many aspects of what I think about with Mizzen and Main, with Harbor, and even just about being a team member and a friend and a colleague.
Well, that's a great way to wrap it up, Kevin. And by the way, there was no right answer to that question, and we so often and I love ending with that question because we so often get parents and spouses and immediate family and stuff because you're absolutely right. I mean, so much of this goes back to if you've got that foundation, if you've got that support, it certainly can make what is a pretty hard journey a little bit easier along the way. So that wasn't a trick question at all. That was
Good.
and love the answers. But really, honestly, like I said, Kevin, when we first started, um, it's always fun. Love the products. Really get love what you've been doing at Mizzen and Main. Really excited to see what you're doing at Harvard. Just real quick, can you still are you still allowing for the pre-release on Harbor?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah. So
what's the
Harbor
best way for people to do that?
harbor.co, harbor.co. People can still sign up for the waitlist. Our pre-sales will launch soon. But even if it's, someone's not ready to jump in, we've got an incredible sleep guide for infants and toddlers. We've got great content from pediatric sleep researchers, some great night nurses. We've got postpartum counselors, lactation consultants that have all written great pieces for us. We want to help parents and kids get more sleep. And if we're doing that, whether it's with our free content or our product as we release it this spring and summer, all we want to do is just help parents and kids get more sleep because it is as foundational as it comes. We can go a long time as humans without most things, but water and sleep are as foundational as it comes. And so if we can help parents and kids get more sleep, it's quite literally happier parents and healthier families, which are, better communities. And that is a cause worth pursuing.
Love it, man. We'll get it in the show notes as well in case people want to just click through and get on the pre-release. And I've got a 22 and a 21-year-old, so I'm probably not in your target market, but I am considered to be in your target market for Mizzen and Main. So
That's great.
and
Thanks,
maybe in another decade I'll have some grandchildren on the way, so we'll see. But
We'll be
Kevin,
rooting for
this
you.
is that's right. This is awesome. It's been great. It's been a long time since we last chatted, and it's great to have you on. Your stories are remarkable, and so appreciate that. Thanks for joining us on the Founders Journey podcast. As always, leave a comment, leave a review, like the podcast. Ideally, share it with a founder who may benefit from this information as well. We'll see you on the next edition of the Founders Journey podcast.